20s at the most. I'm afraid, Matt, you're no longer a youth. You're a young man, which is different. But at such a tender age, perhaps he saw these things, was able to look them in the face, as it were, see what their significance was, realize that they would impinge upon him without reaching for the Prozac, which of course wasn't there. In those days, he didn't get depressed. He saw the foresight. He had the imagination to see something beyond, or at least he felt, surely this can't be the answer to everything. There must be something beyond this, and it was that realization which sort of gave him the impetus to pursue his quest for enlightenment. So I just wanted to sort of make a connection with that, because, you know, when you get diagnosed with a serious illness like cancer, well, the reality of sickness is there in front of your face. You can't escape it, especially if it's a life-threatening illness like cancer. And so many people nowadays have to sort of face this. Clearly your niece had to do that. Many of the cancer patients that I met when I was going through treatment at Barts Hospital in the City of London had to face that. Not all of them were able to do so. People try to tell themselves it's not that serious, or maybe just somehow deny the whole experience. Unfortunately, quite a lot of people are in that sort of frame, or dwell in that sort of frame of mind. But there are also people who do face it. And I remember meeting a young woman. She was certainly younger than your niece. She was probably in her maybe late 20s, early 30s, who I just happened to be in a waiting room at the same time that she was for a CT scan. And we just got talking. She started the conversation because she saw that I had a fitness tracker on my arm. I had a water bottle. I had trainers on. And so she inquired, "Are you a runner?" I said, "No, I'm not a runner. I've got dodgy knees. I'm a swimmer and cyclist." And we had a very brief conversation. But it was really one of the most touching moments in that whole period for me, because it transpired that she had 2 young children. I said, "Your husband's not here." She said, No. He's at home with the two kids. But you know, we clearly both had cancer. We didn't talk specifically about that. I just mentioned I just finished chemo, and she too had been through chemo. I asked her how many rounds she'd had. She said 8. 8's a lot. They only gave me 6, mind you, different drugs for different cancers. But it was a very, very touching experience, and I felt I had a kind of conversation with her that I could hardly have had with anybody else. It was unique, and I valued it. And you know, we subsided into silence because we were both waiting for a scan. And as she was called through the scanning room, she just looked at me and I looked back, and just wonderful exchange of smiles. It's a really human moment. Of course, I haven't seen her again. I mean, she might be dead for all I know by now. I mean, I hope not, certainly hope not. But I was very, very conscious of the sort of potential tragedy of this young woman's life, because she really was quite young. And looking at her, you would never think that she had a life-threatening illness. And she's clearly very fit, or had been before the cancer, whatever kind of cancer it was. I didn't inquire, but I've had some wonderful, magical moments like that with my fellow patients from time to time. But we're all in the same boat. You got to face the fact that you've got a disease that could kill you. And that's not an easy thing for most people to face up to. Another friend of mine, well, an actual friend of mine, she's an actress who I knew when I was young. I lost contact with her when I stopped working, but she became quite well known. And I used to maintain contact with some of my theatre friends from time to time. I was always asking after her because, you know, we got on really well, and the two of us got on really well. And anyway, she got a cancer, and I was told that she would not face the fact that she had a cancer. I find that difficult to believe, by the way, but this is what I was told. And that she worked right to the last. She was working at the National Theatre at the time she died. She was playing most of the main roles at that stage in her career. She was in her early 30s, but she died of the cancer. But what really struck me about the story, truthful or not, the idea that she could not admit to herself the fact that she had life-threatening disease struck me as being really tragic, because these sort of things present us with an opportunity. And anyone who looks these things full in the face will benefit from doing so. But there is a precondition which is necessary, and that is a basis of positive emotion. Because if you just try to look the sort of harsher realities of life full in the face, as it were, without that, well, it might have a depressing effect. There's a very famous incident in the life of the Buddha where he left a group of disciples contemplating death and impermanence, a group of bhikkhus in the forest, monks, as it were, his disciples. And he came back a few weeks later, and they all committed suicide. Clearly, he'd misjudged. That's not what he intended, that they should become depressed and commit suicide, but that's what had happened. So it's really important when you consider anything like this that you have a basis of positive emotion. But if you have that basis of positive emotion, and if you can develop that, as we try to do at this centre and all of our centres by doing the Metabhavana practice, then it presents you with an opportunity. You can create the necessary condition to look, to just look at these things, consider them, contemplate them, and sit comfortably with them. I certainly don't remember saying this, but I was reminded, well, I did an online interview a few weeks back, and I was interviewed by someone I live with. He's one of the young men I live with. He used to be a theatre director. So we had a strong connection because of a common love of the theatre. He lived with me throughout the whole period of the chemotherapy, radiotherapy, etc. And apparently he said to me that when I was going through, we told the people watching this interview that when we were living together and I was going through chemo, that I'd said at one point that I'd never been so happy in my life, which I certainly don't remember saying. Seems a bizarre thing to say in the circumstances, doesn't it? But I think these things, these kind of experiences make you feel so much more alive, because you don't know when you're going to drop off your perch. You know what I mean? It could happen the next day. And it gives you a certain urgency about the seriousness of your own life, which is quite unique, and it's very, very difficult to sustain, as I later found out. But it's hardly surprising that it's difficult to sustain, because to live life at that kind of intensity all the time would probably be a bit too much. But at the time, it's really quite exhilarating. Because you sort of feel you've got, you're sort of, you're brought to the edge of existence at times. Now, it doesn't mean to say that there aren't at least moments where all this can become a little bit frightening. I did have one or two moments myself, but they were very few and far between. So this is something else that this kind of, this sort of experience of cancer makes you have to deal with, is facing your own fear. We've all got them, and of course, ultimately, the fear that we all have is fear of death, or at least fear of pain, fear of disease, fear of cancer. I find it quite striking that a lot of people really don't want to talk about it, especially those who've got it. I can kind of understand why you might not want to talk about it, by the way. I mean, there have been times when I certainly didn't. I didn't want the cancer to dominate my life more than necessary. I wanted to forget about it. I mean, not in a denying kind of way, but there's so much more to my life than just the cancer. I was going through cancer treatment, but I was also doing other things. I never stopped teaching at the LBC. The London Buddhist Centre. I gave quite a few talks, actually. I led a course as well, a course in meditation. One day, Jnana Vacha, who some of you will know, looked at me when I was about to give a talk downstairs in our main shrine room. And he looked at me rather concerned and said, Devamitra, are you up to this? But I knew perfectly well. I just needed to get started. Once I got started, it'll be fine. It's like tonight, you know, often I really don't know what I'm going to say when I sit down. I've got a vague idea of where I might go, but I've gone off on a completely different tack this evening from the one I got onto in Croydon on Saturday. So it's all sort of just as it arises, as it were. But he was really concerned. He didn't think I would be able to do it, but I knew as soon as I got started, I'd be fine. And I was. It wasn't the greatest talk I've ever given, by the way, but I got a lot of appreciation at the end, but I think probably more for effort rather than content. A very kind audience down there. So one of the main things that I'm trying to draw out of my experience of cancer is that it's a wonderful opportunity to make the most of adversity. I'm sorry to say this, but if you haven't found this out already, you probably will sooner or later. What makes us grow most, what makes us change for the better, most frequently are the more painful experiences of life, adversity. I think I've always tried to bring that attitude to my Buddhist practice because I think it's already in me in a way, without it being that conscious. But I knew somehow that, you know, difficult situations help you to grow. I was telling this story in Croydon on Saturday because it sort of illustrates the spirit in a way, which was that when I was just out of drama school, I noticed there was a big general audition for some, I can't remember, some West End show. I knew I didn't stand a chance of getting any work from it. And I knew it would be humiliating. Just knew, because I'm not a very good singer. I'm not very musical, unlike Matt, who plays the saxophone very, very nicely. I turned up, it was at the Shaftesbury Theatre, not Shaftesbury, the Cambridge Theatre, which is in Shaftesbury Avenue. I mean, it's one of the largest theatres in the West End. The stage is enormous. The auditorium is vast. And we were given 5 minutes, and you had to walk onto the stage, hand your sheet music over to a pianist, who started to play immediately before you're ready. And I immediately lost my place in the music. And I was a few bars behind him. After about, I don't know, less than, it must have been half a minute or something, you know, with all the stagehands watching in the wings, sniggering. This voice, just a voice, you couldn't see anybody, way back in the stalls, just tiny little light, there's maybe about 4 people out there. This voice just yelled out, "Next!" It's kind of classic stuff. It's what happens to greenhorns that, you know, put themselves through the paces. Now, I knew something like that was likely to happen. And it was deeply humiliating. But, you know, you enter a world like that, it's pretty tough. You've got to toughen up. You know, if you want to succeed in that world, you've got to be pretty tough. And I knew I needed to toughen up, so I deliberately did that. If you want to lead the Dharma life, the Buddhist life, you've got to toughen up. Because if you don't, you just let it go. Because part of, I mean, really what we're trying to do very often is just deal with those difficult circumstances that life throws in our face, overcome them. So that ultimately, you can deal with anything like that in a spirit of equanimity. And it is possible. But it does mean facing up to the reality that you face on a day-by-day basis. It's intensified if you've got something like cancer, but actually we're all in the same boat. Because ultimately we all have the same end, whether it's ended by cancer or something else. We all die, which is the big question that life throws at us. How are you going to deal with that? Not a question that people like to ask, of course, especially not of themselves, but nonetheless, always in the background is the only certainty about existence, which is that one day you will die. There are no other certainties. That is the only one. And somehow you've got to come to terms with that. And so the best training for that is just dealing with the difficult things that you encounter in the course of your life, not shying away from them, and dealing with them positively. One of the reasons why I've spent nearly all of my life living in a men's community, well, certainly all my adult life, is because it's a challenging situation. Not in an unpleasant way, although in the early days it could get a bit rough before we knew what we were doing. But in the community that I live in now, even though I'm 74 and actually pretty much twice the age of the next oldest member of my community, you know, I get challenged by my community members. One particular member of the community observes me very, very minutely. And I know something's coming. I can see the flash in his eyes. What have I done now? And he very kindly just brings my attention to something that I haven't done, I said I would do, or whatever. Not too often, and I'm pretty good, really. My practice has sort of rubbed off a little bit over 50 years, but sometimes even I say even I, everybody needs these things to be brought to their attention, because we don't notice ourselves. We don't notice our own shortcomings. We need them usually. We usually need other people to point them out to us, hopefully kindly, not unkindly. And that's the spirit with which I've led my life. And that really helped to sort of deal with the cancer when it arose. I often say these days when I'm teaching meditation, or even just teaching Buddhism in a general sort of way, is you've got to be patient. I've been practicing the Dharma for 50 years, I've been practicing Buddhism for 50 years, practicing meditation for 50 years. And it took me, really decades to really fully understand that I needed to be patient, that the practices that we teach are effective, including the meditation practices that we teach, but they're very subtle. And they have their effects very, very slowly. The reason being that we are, all of us, very, very deeply conditioned by we know not what. We know not what we bring with us from a previous life. If you believe in previous lives, can't say I believe in previous lives. I can't remember one, but it seems as good an explanation to me as any, probably the best that I've been able to come up with. You know, how do you explain Mozart otherwise? I mean, how did he compose such wonderful music at such an early age? So I believe that probably we bring something with us from a previous life, and according to Buddhist analysis, what that is primarily is our deep-seated conditionings. But they're deep-seated. They run really deep. They're not easily overcome. If you've got a bad temper and you think you were born with a bad temper, and that's the way, you know, God made you, and you're always going to be, well, it's probably very deeply rooted. I mean, I did meet a fellow cancer patient who rather had this attitude. I did eventually manage to talk to him about it, because he was making life hell for the nurses on the ward, the chemo ward, and everybody else there, all the other patients. But we change very, very slowly, because our conditionings, our negative emotions run deep. Of course, our negative emotions and our blindness is not the whole story. We're not all one-sided. But according, again, to Buddhist analysis, greed hatred and delusion are the core negative emotions, and they're at the core of our being. If they weren't, we wouldn't be here. And the big challenge is to overcome them. And they can be overcome, but it takes application, it takes time. And if you're trying to do that, it takes a lot of patience. I did a 9-month solitary retreat some years ago when I was a young pensioner, a mere stripling of 65. I mean, I've done lots of solitary retreats in my life. I reckoned that I've probably spent about 4 years of my life in solitude. I've done them very, very regularly, at least a month. Most years of my life since I became an ordained Buddhist. Anyway, I did a 9-month retreat, and the first thing I said to the order member who met me when I came out of that retreat was, I think I might have just wasted the last 9 months of my life. And he looked at me and laughed and said, I don't think so, Devamitra. And he was right. But it wasn't obvious to me that I hadn't wasted that 9 months. And it wasn't obvious because you start at day 1 and you finish at day, I don't know how many days it was, a heck of a lot. The same, broadly speaking, each day, it's pretty much the same. There's nobody to talk to for a start. It's just your own company all the way through, and your own mental state, trying to live with them, trying to get beyond the, trying to get beyond them, frankly. But it seemed like every day was like the other, pretty much. But I think what had really happened was that slowly, sort of minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, slow progression had taken place. But it was slow, and it was subtle, and it wasn't obvious until I could look back in retrospect. And especially when people told me they thought I'd really changed. I could then take it seriously. And then I realized that, well, this practice that we do takes a long time. I was always prone to impatience and irritability. I'm much less prone to it now. I mean, to those things now. I wouldn't say I'm completely free of them, but in fact, I definitely am not. But they've been significantly reduced over 50 years. It doesn't happen overnight. So we need to be patient. If you're practicing meditation, you need to be patient with yourself in meditation too. Don't expect spectacular sort of things to happen. They do seem to happen to some people, not to me, frankly. Very occasionally, I think once or twice during those 9 months. But they're fleeting, and certainly didn't characterize the 9 months I was on my own in solitude, or they haven't characterized my life as a Buddhist. They've just been occasional experiences, and they're not the most important either. The most important is to maintain the momentum, to keep doing what you're doing, developing mindfulness, becoming more mindful, more aware of your mental states, etc., developing more and more positive emotion. So that if you ever suffer, if you ever are in the unfortunate position of being diagnosed with a cancer, you'll be able to deal with it positively. Some people seem to manage it even without that. I did meet some remarkable people when I was going to the hospital. But you'll be well placed to deal with it and actually capitalize upon it. And if you'd like to know more, you can buy a copy of my book and read it. So, of course, one of the main reason I'm here is to flog books. It's not the main reason, but it's part of it. So I'd like to open up and see if you've got any questions. But before I do that, I'd like to say one more thing, which is a bit cheeky, really, but I really believe in the book that I've written. I really want to promote it because I think that it can help many people. My oncologist has read it. Don't know what she's made of it. I'll find out on Thursday. Gave her a copy, and I left it with her secretary actually, and I got an email from her saying, just got a copy of the book. Started reading it. I didn't realize I featured so prominently. Yikes! So I don't know what she made of the whole thing, but anyway, I hope she'll say, yeah, I found it very helpful, very enlightening, etc., etc. But anyway, a lot of people that I know who've read it have been very, very appreciative of it. I think it can help a lot of people. So why I'm mentioning this is that I'm doing a tour of all the Triratna centres, or as many as will invite me in to speak about the book. But that's a very limited audience. And my book is not a Buddhist book. The context in which I speak about cancer and its treatments is, well, it's very much from a Buddhist perspective, because I am a Buddhist. How could I not bring that perspective? But I believe it can help anybody, whether they're Buddhist or not. And so I really want to break out from the sort of Buddhist environment. I'm giving a talk next week, actually, at Queen Mary's University in London to a group of medical students. But if any of you would like to invite me to some other venue to speak about all this, please do get in touch. I'm sure that Arta Priya or someone at the centre would find a way of getting in touch with me, but I'm really serious about that, actually. I want people to benefit from what I've done, because I think it will help a lot of people. Okay, let's leave that there for the moment, see if you've got any questions.